rumors of war. Revelations of mass graves in Ukraine prompt renewed calls for peace. Earth Day. President Joe Biden promotes a climate change agenda against the backdrop of war. All a Twitter, tracking the latest upheavals among social media giants. And Real Presence. A special new film testifies to the power of prayer before the Holy Eucharist. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, April 22nd, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sabol. The United Nations Secretary General plans to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin face-to-face next week. Antonio Guterres is making an urgent plea for peace in Ukraine. Meanwhile, a possible mass grave was found near Mariupol. Satellite photos appear to show rows upon rows of freshly dug trenches. Ukrainian officials say this is evidence of President Putin's war crimes. We have team coverage tonight. EWTN News Rome Correspondent Colm Flynn joins us now from Ukraine. Colm, good to see you. I know that you've been in some of the worst affected areas there. Talk to us about what you're seeing today.
Well, good evening, Tracy, from Independence Square in the capital of Ukraine. We're here in Kiev, and you're right, over the past number of days, we have been travelling across Ukraine with a group from the Pontifical Mission Societies. We started off in the very west of the country, close to the border with Poland, around an hour and a half from it, in the city of Lviv. And there we visited a monastery who are hosting over 170 refugees from all different parts of Ukraine, particularly here in Kiev, the outskirts, and in the eastern region, which is still under heavy bombardment as we speak. We then moved to Ternopil, another city where we met with more refugees, and then last night we made the 8.5-hour drive all the way to Kiev, the capital. And today, Tracy, we went to the outskirts and we really got a sense of the sheer devastation and destruction, there are really no other words to describe it, that has been left in the wake of this Russian invasion, which is still ongoing. We saw people's homes, apartments, shops, petrol stations, everything had been destroyed in certain pockets, in certain areas. And it was incredible to see, Tracy, because, of course, we know the Russian army have said that they have always been targeting military installations, military bases. But clearly, these were residential apartments, schools. We saw one playground that had been completely destroyed. We saw a centre for culture, a cinema, with the marks of the Russian tanks going right through the grass, and the place completely decimated. So to see it on TV, Tracy, is one thing, but to be here and to witness it first time, it's surreal. That's the word that I keep hearing from the team we're travelling with. It does not seem real, what you see in front of you. It looks like a Hollywood movie set, not something that is really playing out and happening as we speak, still here in Ukraine today.
Colm, that is so heartbreaking to hear all of that. And I understand that you're traveling with a group from the Pontifical Mission Societies. What can you tell me about their trip?
That's right. This is the New York office of the Pontifical Mission Societies, led by Monsignor Kieran Harrington. He's joined by two priests, Father Sebastian and Father Israel, who have both come from New York. Father Israel from Cuba originally, and Father Sebastian coming from Argentina. And their job really at the Pontifical Mission Society is to be there on the ground when people are most in need, and to show their solidarity and to walk with them, to walk the walk in those locations where they need the help the most. So they have come here to Ukraine, bringing with them humanitarian aid, medical aid, food. And because, Tracy, they are celebrating, which we'll talk about in a moment, they're celebrating Holy Week this week, a week after we do, they want to be here and pray with the people, to be with them at a time of hope and of new beginnings. So that's what they have been doing, and we have been lucky enough to travel with them, to stay with them in the monasteries, and to be with them as they're meeting the people and walking with them.
And Colm, before I let you go, as you mentioned, it is Holy Week there. Tell me, how are the faithful feeling right now?
Well, Tracy, as you can imagine, it's very difficult for them. It's one thing in our part of the world where we have stability and peace to talk about things like hope and forgiveness and new beginnings, which can be difficult things to achieve at the best of times. So here, when your country is in a state of war, when you know that parts of your country, especially in the east, are being blasted, people are being killed in their thousands, trying to think of hope is something very difficult, and then trying to think of forgiveness is just another thing completely. So that is something that Monsignor Kieran Harrington and the group have been talking to their counterparts here in the Greek-Ukrainian Catholic Church. It's been fascinating to see them still go to church, to speak to the people, and to see the faithful come in and still pray, looking to God for guidance. Because actually the rector of the seminary we met in Lviv, he said something interesting to me when he said, we have to tell Christians here that, yes, put your faith in the Ukrainian army, put your faith in the president, put your faith in the humanitarian aid that is coming from nations all over the world. But first you have to put your faith in Jesus, and all together we will prevail. So it was incredible to hear that. And then I came back to him, actually, Tracy, and I said, yeah, faith and reason. He said, no, not faith and reason, because sometimes hope and faith goes against reason, which was very interesting. He said, you have to have the faith to have the hope.
Well, Colm, thank you so much for your report. We're praying for you and, of course, everyone in Ukraine. Colm Flynn, EWTN News Rome Correspondent. Thank you again, Colm, and be safe.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
With the war in Ukraine expected to drag on for months and with casualties adding up by the day, President Joe Biden is being asked to set up field hospitals in Poland near Ukraine's border. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, more than a dozen U.S. lawmakers on both sides of the political aisle are making that request of President Joe Biden tonight. This as terrible images of war arrive on TV and computer screens virtually nonstop.
You know, our forests are our planet's lungs. They literally are recycling and cycling CO2 out of the atmosphere. That's what they do.
President Joe Biden issues an executive order on this Earth Day protecting old growth trees from wildfires. Meantime, across the globe, Russia releasing video of its missile launches against targets in Ukraine from a ship in the Black Sea. Russia says talks to end the fighting in Ukraine have ground to a halt.
What we would tell you this morning is that we still assess that Mariupol is contested, that it hasn't been taken by the Russians, and that there's still an active Ukrainian resistance. So they continue to fight for that city.
As the horrors of war continue to unfold in Ukraine, some U.S. lawmakers are asking Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to ramp up to increase medical support in the form of field hospitals, armored ambulances, and to treat the wounded, the injured, at a U.S. military hospital in Germany.
On Twitter, South Carolina Congressman Joe Wilson tweeting, grateful to join bipartisan colleagues requesting Secretaries Blinken and Austin for medical health care aid to Ukrainian people. It's essential we address Ukraine's growing humanitarian needs. The Pentagon emphasized no U.S. troops will be on the ground in Ukraine, but added the U.S. will do this.
Continue to flow weapons and systems to the Ukrainians that will help them in this fight that is now brewing in the east.
Now, also tonight, President Biden will be spending the weekend in Delaware. And then next week, President Biden welcomes to the White House the champion NHL Tampa Bay Lightning. And he'll also be honoring some Teachers of the Year. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, if Republicans win back control of the U.S. House after November's midterm election, they are considering term limits for top committee posts, and that would force several senior Democrats to step aside next year. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales takes a closer look at the reasoning behind it.
Let's face it, it's politics after Democrats asked 2 Republicans to sit on the January 6th committee without asking for any GOP leadership input, which was unprecedented. Leader McCarthy said months ago that Speaker Pelosi opened Pandora's box.
Pelosi has created a sham process. No committee in Congress will work if one person is picking all who can serve. This has not happened before.
So now, Leader McCarthy and other House Republican leaders want to change the rules of the next Congress even further, adding term limits for committee chairs and ranking members. Under a GOP majority, it might be the beginning of the end for top Democrats who would be blocked from keeping their top committee slots next year. and force others out of coveted top slots. Among Democrats who would lose their positions, Representative Maxine Waters on the Financial Services Committee, Representative Benny Thompson on the Homeland Security Committee, Representative Jerry Nadler on the Judiciary Committee, Representative Adam Smith on the Armed Services Committee. Any GOP term limits plan would also be a huge blow to the seniority system, a bedrock of internal House politics. Catholic Congressman Alex Mooney tells me he supports the plan.
The Republicans have had an internal term limit of 6 years as a committee chair. For whatever reason, the Democrats have never had term limits, despite their rhetoric. They've never had those type of term limits. So the majority party puts the rules in place for the entire House.
Republican Congressman Tim Burchett blames Democrats for violating past tradition. Quote, when the Democrats voted to remove Republican members from committees, they pierced the veil and justified Republican members who want to make sure everyone's abiding by the same rules next year.
Ironically, several progressive Democrats support the idea. They say that they'd like to see younger, fresher faces lead committees. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
About 24 people were injured during a clash at the Al-Aqsa mosque in Jerusalem's Old City. Israeli police responded to Palestinians who were stoning a gate where they were stationed. Separately, Israeli defenses intercepted rockets fired from the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. Also in Jerusalem's Old City today, only a few miles away, Orthodox Christians observed Good Friday. Pilgrims took part in a traditional procession, recalling the Stations of the Cross, retracing Jesus' steps toward crucifixion. The Orthodox celebrates Easter this Sunday. While back in the U.S., refugees from across the world are being welcomed by a support group in the Motor City.
This network is a coalition of community and civic and corporate leaders coming together to provide support services for refugees from Afghanistan, Ukraine, and other nations as they resettle here in the city of Detroit.
The Detroit Refugee Network is combining the resources of 3 local charities. It hopes to raise more than $1 million for a broad range of assistance. More than 600 people from Afghanistan have resettled near Detroit since last year. Coming up, assessing the big business of social media and its challenges for free speech. We have analysis. Florida's governor has signed a bill to end Walt Disney World's self-governing district near Orlando. Lawmakers had approved the measure after the company publicly opposed the state's new parental rights law. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis recently signed the ban on school discussion of controversial sex education topics with young children through the 3rd grade. Meantime, Elon Musk, the world's richest man, says that he has secured $46.5 billion to finance a purchase of Twitter. The founder of Tesla and SpaceX made a public offer last week to buy the social media platform shortly after it was released that he had more than a 9% stake in the company. Twitter has not yet formally responded to Musk's offer. And joining me now to discuss is Rachel Bovard, Senior Policy Director at the Conservative Partnership Institute and Senior Tech Columnist at The Federalist. Rachel, welcome back. Always so good to see you. As you know, Elon Musk says that he has all his financing lined up to buy out Twitter, and he recently commented that the board's economic interests are simply not aligned with shareholders. I'd like to get your thoughts on all that.
So I think Elon Musk is coming at this from 2 angles. I think the first is he genuinely does not think that Twitter is serving its shareholders well. But you've also heard him talk about the fact that his interest in Twitter is primarily aligned around the interest of free speech. He wants to see this platform allow more speech. He said the economics don't matter to him. That's a really important motivation. So I think that's what's driving a lot of this.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, Twitter has not formally responded to the offer. However, Musk's initial bid to buy the company, the board actually unanimously voted to adopt a poison pill, which, of course, is a plan to essentially fend off a potential hostile takeover. Let's talk more about that and why there seems to be so much pushback to his offer.
Yeah, you've seen the board take a very defensive posture, adopting this poison pill designed, to avoid Musk taking over, but also, distill any attempt by anyone else to do so. And I think it's because Elon Musk in his comments has really grasped something significant about the role Twitter plays in the big tech universe, in our public square universe, which is that, even though it's much smaller than Facebook and Google, it exerts an outsized influence on news, on narrative formation. It's where cable news talks to each other. It's where stories begin and end. It's what drives the national conversation. Elon Musk has recognized this about Twitter, and so have the people that want to constrain the conversation on Twitter, including Twitter itself. You've heard the acting CEO of Twitter, Parag Agrawal, say this. He said, look, our responsibility is not the First Amendment. Our responsibility is to cultivate, healthy conversations. So they have two very different visions. And the country has two very different visions, I also think, for what social media should be. And you're seeing those clash right now at the highest level.
And Rachel, I'm curious, your take on all this. Ultimately, what do you think will end up happening?
Well, I'm surprised, that Elon Musk is actually hanging in there. I think anyone who's observed Elon Musk for any length of time knows he's a little bit mercurial. He's got some other projects. No one was certain if this was a really genuine effort or more of, something he was interested in today that he'd forget about tomorrow. But he is serious. It really does look like he's seriously putting, a lot of effort behind this. So it's going to be difficult. Should he continue to offer what he's offering, it's going to be difficult for Twitter to ignore it. They have a fiduciary responsibility to consider this in the interest of their shareholders. They cannot simply say nothing. So if Musk hangs in there, it's going to be very difficult for Twitter to turn this down.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what shakes out. I also want to get your take on Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signing that bill into law today that will strip Walt Disney of its self-governing status of its Orlando theme park. Talk to us about the significance of all this.
So I think this is a hugely significant shift, for the right, because for a long time, I think the right has said, okay, companies are going to do this. They grumble about it. They move on. Governor Ron DeSantis and the legislature of Florida has said, look, we're not going to take this. And I would point out, too, that the bill itself is not just Disney specific. It actually targets all special districts across the state, resets the state back to before those even existed, back to 1968, allows corporations to petition for those special districts to be put back into effect, but basically says, look, we shouldn't have this very specific legal entitlement for specific corporations. Everybody should be on an equal playing field. And I think it's significant also because, for the first time, you're starting to see the right actually push back against, what they term as woke capital, what I call woke capital. And, I think it's going to be interesting to see because corporations for a long time have thought they can just push people around. There's no more of this Michael Jordan's, Republicans buy sneakers too. A lot of these corporations actively disdain conservative values, and that will cost them in the market. And I think that this bill is a first step toward really enforcing that.
Okay, we're going to leave it right there. Rachel, thank you so much. I always appreciate your insights. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Up next, drawing spiritual strength from the real presence of Jesus in the Holy Eucharist. Alive is a documentary highlighting the transformative power of the Holy Eucharist. The film, directed and produced by Spanish filmmakers, showcases how the real presence of Christ in the Holy Sacrament changed 5 people's lives. And joining me now to discuss is Lucia Gonzalez, founder of Bosco Films. Lucia, great to see you. Thank you so much for your time today. Can you talk to us more about the documentary? I know the film focuses on 5 men and women whose lives were touched by the Eucharist. What more can you tell us?
It's a very special documentary. It's a movie testimonial about, as you say, 5 people. One of them is a marriage, and the other one are young people who were in the beginning atheists, and something happened in their lives some years ago, and going to an Eucharistic adoration, their lives changed in a moment. And I think it's a very interesting and so surprise documentary, because even it's so simple, because it's just people speaking about something that happened to them, how was their life before and after this moment in adoration, without knowing what was happening there, that changed their life forever.
And speaking of, with the documentary, as we know, it's a Spanish documentary. What was the reaction to it in Spain and also in Mexico?
It was a huge surprise. In Spain, where the movie was produced, it was thought in the beginning as something that we need to share, or Father Jose Pedro wanted to share, because he was watching many people changing around these adorations, and he thought, I think this is nice to know. Of course, I feel grateful to know all these stories, all these people that are changing lives, and now they feel happy inside. But it was thought maybe for not with big expectations, but the reality it was released 1 year ago, exactly 1 year ago, April on the last year, in 6 theaters, just 6 theaters in Spain, and it was a huge success. Alive 1 year ago was sold out in all the seasons and in all the theaters, and it was something that surprised a lot in the cinema industry, because Alive doesn't have a well-known director, it doesn't have stars, don't have budget to make it and for advertising. So it was just people speaking to one another, telling, I have seen a very interesting movie, I have seen a movie that touched my heart, and I have seen a movie that maybe you will need it. And that make for this movie to start in 6 theaters in Spain and to finish in around 100, and still in theaters for 4 months, something that it's almost impossible for a documentary. I think it's for 2 reasons. One of them is after the pandemic, many people are more open to speak and hear about spiritual things, and also it's because they suffer a lot, or it's one of us knows someone that is still suffering because of the consequences of the pandemic. So this, I think it's important that people who show it were buying, and this is so interesting because it's not usual. They saw the movie, they feel touched, and they start buying tickets for all these people, friends, familiars, that they were thinking that maybe something that they needed. And the other one is that being the other reason, being a very simple documentary, it's full of truth, because it's not something that want to convince you. It's just people speaking to you and telling something that happens to them. And when you see and hear the truth, I think we can recognize it.
Absolutely. And Lucia, thank you so much for making this movie. We can't wait to see it, and thank you for your time today. God bless you.
God bless you too.
And in case you're interested, the Alive film will be shown in the United States for 1 day only on Monday, April 25th. You can visit alivethemoment.com to purchase tickets. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night and God bless.